From Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome now to Balance of Power. This is where the world of politics meets the world of business. I'm David Weston. We're going to start out with a check on the markets, and joining us today is Abigail Doolittle. So what's going on with the markets? I see equities are down just a little bit, it looks like.
Yeah, there's a bit of a risk-off tone at this point, David. Earlier today, it felt as though traders were trying to push out of the malaise that we've had over the last couple of days as the reflation trade has gone on pause, as investors and traders realize that it may take longer to get a big stimulus deal done than had been earlier thought. So at this point, we do have the major averages down just a little bit, but really exemplifying the idea, again, that reflation trade is on pause. We have the NASDAQ 100 at this point even joining the negativity. Earlier, it had been higher, but it's down ever so slightly, down about 0.1%. But big tech in the form of the FANG index is holding higher, up 0.4%. That, of course, is defense. On the other hand, David, you have small cap and banks down once again. So we were talking about this yesterday, the idea that it's not quite a sell the news moment, but again, as traders recognize that it's taking much longer to get some sort of big stimulus deal done, if it gets done at all, the size, that $1.9 trillion, the big bid up, the rally that we had in the fourth quarter of last year, it is just on hold right now.
Well, that is exactly what I was going to ask you about. We do have the Fed tomorrow, but at this point, it seems like it's more about stimulus. Is it on? Is it off? We heard President Trump yesterday saying, look, I beg your pardon, President Biden saying, I really want it. I can do with less than 1.9. I'm willing to negotiate. Are people really reacting to that question, or is it also the complication of impeachment, maybe delaying everything?
I don't think it has so much to do with impeachment. I think it has more to do with the stimulus itself in terms of when, probably more so the timing. I don't think anybody thinks it's likely to come out at $1.9 billion at this point. One positive move, of course, was now Senator Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell, Minority Leader, agreeing to the fact that there does not have to be the filibuster deal, that because there's two Democratic senators who are not going to vote against that. So the Republicans feel as though they have some sort of voting power in there still. But the timing of the potential stimulus, they're talking about March. I think that there were some traders back in November, once Joe Biden was elected, or was president-elect at that point, thought that there was going to be a big deal right away. And the number we have, $1.9 billion, but again, it just seems as though it's being pushed out. And then you have President Biden yesterday, as you mentioned, saying that he's willing to maybe have it be a little bit smaller. So it probably isn't going to be as big. So you just see a little bit of adjustment, a repricing of risk around this readjustment in expectations.
Okay, thank you so much to Abigail Doolittle for that report on the markets. And now we have a very special guest. He is the governor of New Jersey, and he is, of course, Phil Murphy. So, Governor, thank you so much for being with us. Usually we want to talk to you about a lot of things. This is really about COVID and about vaccinations. I got to be frank with you. So let's go to the numbers first. After a spike up after the holidays, it looks to me at least like it's coming down pretty much in all the counties across New Jersey. Where are you, and are you considering backing off on some of the restrictions?
David, good to be with you. I think if the numbers continue to go in the right direction, I think we will consider backing off some of this. We take some pride in the fact that we may have been the last state to open things up on the inside, but we've kept it literally almost the entire time now, many months at levels that were the same where they opened. But we're in the plateau, it would be my guess right now. The footnote would be the variant from the UK, which we know is in New Jersey. So I have to say that, we don't know 100% how that is going to take us from here, but I'd say we are in the plateau and beginning to come down mode, God willing.
And what does that say about your hospital situation? We know in New York now they're starting to allow some elective surgery, presumably because they have enough capacity. Do you have enough capacity in New Jersey?
We do. So unlike the spring where we had to postpone elective surgeries, we have not had to do that in the second wave. So our hospitals are staying, right now we've got about 3,250 folks in our hospitals across the state from COVID. The peak was 8,270 in April. So we are, thank God, a long distance from that.
So obviously the way to really get through this is through vaccines. Everybody believes that at this point. Give us a sense of where you are in New Jersey. How many people do you have to vaccinate to get to that critical 75% number? What kind of time horizon does that require?
So, David, our objective is to get to 4.7 million adults in New Jersey. That would be 70% of our adult population within 6 months, and we said that in December. I still think we've got a shot at that, but we got overpromised and underdelivered by the last administration. And so we're still bumping along at a plus or minus 100,000 first doses a week That's probably a fraction of what we actually need. The good news is we're bearing down now on 600,000 vaccinations done already. We've got 270 different distribution points around the state. So we've got the footprint and infrastructure in place. We just need more supplies. And I know the Biden administration is laser focused on this. They will fix it, but it will take some time.
So let's talk about that for a moment. I heard a rumor that you might be on a conference call with some fellow governors this afternoon with the White House. If that's true, what will you ask them?
At the moment, I'm not scheduled to be on one, but that doesn't mean that may not happen. I think it'll be just that. I mean, it's a world of difference in less than a week in two respects: a national consistent strategy, and then intense laser focused on, especially on vaccines. And they know this because we speak to the team literally every day. We need more doses, and if we get them, we've got the infrastructure in place to make sure they get into people's arms.
What kind of visibility do you have at this point about what's coming down the pipeline? Not what you have now, but what do you think that the pipeline might look like? And are you hampered at all by the notion of having to reserve that second vaccine, the second inoculation, and not giving it out?
Yeah, we have one distribution site that has had some challenges on the second dose, but beyond that, that is not an issue for us. I'm knocking on wood here. We've got that piece of this. We want to be a reliable state. We want folks to know if they come in, get the first dose, that we're gonna have their second booster shot when they need it. I think, David, visibility-wise, I think it stays about where we are now, unfortunately, for some number of more weeks. And then I would guess in something like a month or two, you're in a much better place. That would be my current guess.
Where are you right now with the schools, with getting kids back into schools? You go to anywhere around the country, agrees, until we get the kids back in schools, we're not really going to be able to open up the country again.
Yeah. So we have run our educational, both our openings and closings, on a district by district basis. Without going into the details, the biggest number of our districts are in a hybrid mode. So there's somebody in the school building every day. The second biggest chunk of districts are all remote. The good news is the all remote number has begun to come down. And then the third bucket is everybody's in school Monday through Friday. Clearly, if we have more supplies, the next group of folks who deserve to get the vaccines would almost certainly be educators. That will be a game changer. And again, I hope that's sooner than later.
Is the teachers union helping you on this, or maybe not? We hear about Chicago with a possible strike out there.
No, for the most part, they've been terrific. Their concerns are rightful. This is the most stressful school experience anyone has ever had to deal with, whether that's an educator, parents, kids, administrators. And I make it my business each week to call up a handful of educators and talk to them directly. But listen, so far so good. Is it perfect? I mean, everybody wants something right now that is not within reach, and that includes a lot more vaccine doses. But God willing, we'll get there sooner than later.
Okay, we always like to talk about the money. This is Bloomberg after all, but talk about the money in connection with COVID-19. We have President Biden now saying we really need to get some of that $1.9 trillion to the states. Give us a sense of where New Jersey is right now in finances, why that is necessary for you to get done what you need to get done with respect to COVID-19.
You betcha. That $1.9 trillion is just what the doctor ordered. So put aside money for vaccines, testing, getting schools opening, handing checks to richly deserving citizens. We need a big chunk of state and local aid, and we're not alone. This is every American state. That sounds abstract, but what that means is keeping the frontline workers, police, fire, educators, healthcare workers, employed in their position, delivering the services that our residents so desperately need. And our number's a big number. I mentioned to you, I think about 6 or 8 months ago, between then and the end of this calendar year for New Jersey, that could be up to $20 billion. And that's still a number I'm sticking with.
Okay, Governor, you're a very busy man. You're good to take this kind of time. We want to get you back to your job there fighting the COVID-19. That is New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy. And happening right now at the virtual Year Ahead Summit in Davos, Bloomberg's Jason Kelly is interviewing Chris Nassetta, the Hilton CEO. You can tune in using the function Live Go on your terminal. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
Number of our team members and folks across millions of folks across our industry are still impacted, and they're going to be impacted for an extended period of time. We have to take care of those folks. And then we have to provide bridges of liquidity, particularly for small and medium-sized businesses. I look at our,
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and radio. I'm David Weston. For Bloomberg First Word News, we go now to Mark Crumpton.
David, thank you. Pfizer expects to supply the United States with 200 million COVID-19 vaccine doses 2 months sooner than previously expected. CEO Dr. Albert Bourla spoke with Bloomberg editor-in-chief John Micklethwait earlier today at the Bloomberg Year Ahead virtual summit. Bourla also spoke about the vaccine rollout in Europe.
I think it's too early to say that Europe is behind, right? So we are talking about 3 weeks into the vaccination program, basically. And always the first 2 weeks are a little bit challenging. If you see the performance of the US in the first weeks was really, really not good. We had many more vaccines than they could use.
Bourla added that Pfizer and BioNTech would get more doses to the European Union before the end of the second quarter. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says he and Republican leader Mitch McConnell are near an agreement on organizing the evenly divided chamber. For now, Republicans will still have the power to block some parts of President Biden's policy priorities they don't like. But McConnell didn't get the guarantee he wanted that Democrats won't use the filibuster that allows the minority to essentially stop debate. McConnell says he will agree to the rules put in place in 2001, the last time the Senate was split 50-50. Italy's prime minister has resigned. Giuseppe Conte stepped down after a key coalition ally pulled his party's support over Conte's handling of the coronavirus pandemic. That sets the stage for talks to determine if he can form a third government. Conte gave his resignation to President Sergio Mattarella, who held off on any immediate decision other than to ask Conte to keep the government running in the near term. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. David?
So much, Mark. Yesterday, President Biden addressed once again the pressing need that he sees for substantial additional support for the economy and his confidence that he can get it done.
We can't afford not to invest now. We can't afford to fail to invest now. And I think there's a growing realization of that on the part of all but some very, very hard-edged partisans, maybe on both sides. But I think there is a growing consensus. Whether we get it all done exactly the way I want it remains to be seen. But I'm confident that we can work our way through.
We welcome now Libby Cantrell. She is PIMCO head of public policy. So, Libby, you heard a little bit of negotiation, I think, going on there. Whether I'm going to get everything I want, maybe not. What is the signal coming out of the White House right now about what they really are trying to get done?
Yeah, good afternoon, David. I'm spoken like a true legislator, right? I think that, our view is that this $1.9 trillion package really is just an opening bid. And it seems that President Biden understands that as well. Our expectation is that he will get quite a bit of this done, whether it is done on a bipartisan basis with those 60 votes in the Senate and or done via that arcane Senate tool, budget reconciliation, which only requires 50 votes. We're penciling in that about $1 trillion, if not a little bit higher package that does ultimately get done. But I think that Biden's comments really do sort of reflect the fact that he understands that this is an opening bid and that he may not get everything that he wants, albeit he will likely get a large part of it.
So there are at least two elements here. One is money. The other is time. If you're penciling in a number for the amount of money, what are you penciling in for a time when you might get it?
Yeah, I would say that is, these are all, kind of best guesses for sure. Timing is, I think, a little bit more questionable. It really does matter how he does this, how the White House approaches the Senate in particular. Do they try to do this? Do they kind of continue along this route of trying to get those 60 votes, or do they end up pivoting and trying to do this via reconciliation. It seems like they might just do both, maybe try to get a smaller package done via, on a bipartisan basis, and then pivot to the sort of reconciliation process. So I think the kind of the bottom line here is that we'll likely see that, say $1 trillion, if not a little bit higher, may be done in two different bills, but probably done by the end of the sort of the spring timeframe. But again, as you know, these are all just best guesses based on somewhat limited information.
So they're wrangling over the power sharing, which it looks like they're getting pretty close to between the Senate Republicans and Democrats. But one of the issues was preserving that filibuster. Now we have two moderate Democratic senators saying, I'm not going to vote to do away with it. Does that put that issue to the side? Does it mean we're going to keep the filibuster for the next couple of years?
Yeah, and that's been our view, honestly, for a while. It's not just Senators, Manchin and Sinema who've been the most explicit, obviously, most recently, but there are a whole host of other moderates and institutionalists on the Democratic side who also feel pretty ambivalent about abolishing, this norm. Now, something I think that just is important, though, from a market's perspective, is that even if the filibuster stays intact, and that does look very likely for the foreseeable future, again, Democrats can use this reconciliation tool, which only requires 50 votes, not 60. So they can advance a large part of their agenda, again, using this mechanism, even if the filibuster remains in place. So I think in some ways, all that attention there felt misplaced, given the importance of reconciliation and how I think ambitious Democrats are going to be in terms of using it.
Going back to the calendar for a moment, put two things together. One is the impeachment trial, which, as I understand, is going to start sometime around the week of February 8th, and getting the stimulus done at the same time. How long do we think an impeachment trial would take? And we do have a deadline, don't we, of some of those benefits coming due, like in mid-March?
Yeah, March 14th is the kind of the important cliff here, if you will, in terms of benefits like that unemployment insurance that will be expiring at the federal level. So that is sort of the date I think a lot of policymakers are going to be using as a deadline. In terms of the impeachment trial, we'll see. It doesn't seem like it's going to be a long trial. They're talking about a few, if no witnesses. So, we'll have to see, but it doesn't seem like it's going to be comparable to the one that we saw in, sort of December of 2019 timeframe.
And in the meantime, what about confirmation of cabinet appointments? We're getting some coming through now.
Yeah, we've seen, obviously, on a pretty bipartisan basis, it should be, I think, noted, for all of the talk about polarization and partisanship in Washington, Janet Yellen got a very big bipartisan vote yesterday. Tony Blinken for Secretary of State is expected to get a pretty healthy bipartisan vote as well. This is really going to be, in addition to COVID relief, really the focus for the Biden administration. There's an expression, personnel is policy. So getting his personnel in place is going to be very important. If you look at sort of historically where they kind of compare in terms of getting folks in place, are pretty behind just because of all this other stuff going on in the Senate. So we'll see if they can try to catch up on that front. But this is absolutely a priority for the Biden administration.
And in the meantime, as you say, we have sort of an executive order a day.
Yes, an executive order a day. And these are splashy, they make headlines. But in terms of policy, they're not kind of the panacea from a policymaking perspective. Legislation is much preferred because, of course, it's more permanent. It takes an act of Congress to unwind, whereas executive orders, as we have seen, simply take an act of a signature. So really what Biden has done is sort of back to the future. President Trump reversed many of the executive orders that President Obama put in place, and now President Biden is simply reinstating those policies. So in some ways, it just sort of underscores really how kind of not ideal executive orders are from a policymaking perspective. But from a Democratic perspective, Democrats are elated with what Biden has done over this very short period in terms of taking so many executive actions and executive orders, again, kind of reinstating the Obama policy priorities.
Libby, it's always great to have you with us. Thank you so much for your time. That's Libby Cantrell. She is PIMCO, Head of Public Policy. Coming up here, GameStop's wild ride continues with the stock up another 15% today. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. There is news breaking across the Bloomberg right now. There's a vote going on in the Senate to confirm Tony Blinken as the next Secretary of State. Although that vote continues, they now have enough votes, so Tony Blinken will be the next Secretary of the United States. In the meantime, let's turn to that wild ride that GameStop's had. Markets have been captivated since late last week with the phenomenon that is GameStop and the battle between short sellers and a group posting on Reddit, with the stock shooting up and fluctuating wildly. Emma Chandra is here now to bring us up to speed on the drama that is GameStop. So, Emma, it's quite a story.
It is quite a story. It is quite a drama, David. It's keeping everybody entertained, I think, as they're locked down in many parts of the world. Let's start with a few numbers. 32%. That's how much the stock popped at the open today. 400%. That's how much it's up this year. Close to 2,000% it's up in the past year. It is the story that doesn't seem to die. And as you mentioned there in the introduction, it seems to be a battle between short sellers who are heavily short the stock. Let's talk about the revenue. The revenues of the stock had falling. It was a dying company, physical stores in malls selling games. People thought that it had had its day. And then, as you mentioned, there's a bunch of retail traders using Wall Street Bets, the forum on Reddit, to talk up the stock, saying that there are some good things about the fundamentals, and also playing a game, it seems, trying to beat the short sellers. And that is perhaps why we've seen such a huge rally in GameStop stock over the past few days, weeks, and in fact over the past year or so, David.
So, Emma, speculate with me here a bit. We're not supposed to do that as journalists, but speculate with me. We've had social media before, like Reddit. Reddit's been around for quite a while. We certainly have had short sellers for a good long time. How come these two came together in this particular stock at this particular time?
That is a very good question, David. And a lot of people are pointing to the founder of Chewy. That's the company that sells pet food online. He's now a board member of GameStop, but it's someone who started to build a position in the stock back in August of last year, saying that there are ways for this company to turn around, that it could become more of an e-commerce company, that it could be one that dealt with games that are downloadable, which is, of course, the direction of travel we're seeing in that particular sector. And once he got involved, Ryan Cohen, that's when a number of other of those retail investors started to get behind what he was doing, and that's why that's perhaps why we have seen this big change, or this big rally, and this big focus on GameStop.
But for us spectators, we love a good short squeeze when one comes along. I have to say, thank you so much to Emma Chandra for that great report on GameStop. Coming up, Raytheon earnings beat today. We're going to speak with the CEO, Greg Hayes, on the company's terrific fourth quarter, but also what he's seeing as he looks ahead to 2021. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. For Bloomberg First Word News, we go now to Mark Crumpton.
David, thank you. More than 100,000 people have died from the coronavirus in the UK. It's the first country in Europe to surpass that number. Prime Minister Boris Johnson imposed a new lockdown earlier this month to try to prevent the spread of the virus. That's helped reduce the average number of new cases in the past week to almost half that of the peak in early January. New York City is asking the Biden administration for more coronavirus vaccine doses. Mayor Bill de Blasio says the city has given out more than 650,000 doses so far and only has about 7,700 left. De Blasio says the city has the capacity to do much more, but needs supply of the vaccine. New cases in New York continue to decrease following a nationwide trend. President Biden could move as soon as Thursday to reopen federal marketplaces selling Affordable Care Act health plans, also known as Obamacare. The Washington Post says healthcare.gov, an online insurance marketplace, will quickly reopen for at least a few months. President Biden's also reportedly planning to reverse changes by the Trump administration to Medicaid that critics said damaged Americans' access to the program. Severe weather ripped through parts of Alabama overnight, killing at least one person and injuring nearly 30 others. A tornado tore through an area north of Birmingham, downing power lines and flipping cars. Police say a teenager huddling in his basement was killed, and several of his family members were critically injured when a tree crashed onto their home. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg.
Thank you so much, Mark. Raytheon Technologies released its fourth quarter earnings, and they did better than expected on revenue and on earnings per share, while anticipating improvement in its commercial aviation business in the new year. Welcome now, Raytheon CEO Greg Hayes. So, Mr. Hayes, thank you so much for being with us. And I've been admonished to remind people that you had your merger close, I guess, just on April 3rd. So year-over-year doesn't quite work. You're sort of a new company in a sense.
Yeah, it's a little confusing when you look at the pro forma numbers, but yeah, it's April 3rd. We closed on the merger. The same day we spun off Carrier and Otis as standalone public companies. So it was a big year for us, but we got a lot done.
So explain exactly what you did get done and how you did it.
Well, look, when the merger closed last April, we were in the middle, of course, of the lockdown across the country, and we were very fortunate. We moved to a remote work environment. We've got about 190,000 people, and over 100,000 people who were working remote at the day of the merger close. So the team got after it. And I think importantly, back in April and May, as we looked at what was happening and the length of the downturn in commercial aero, we knew we had to take some pretty dramatic actions. And so we identified about $4 billion in cash actions that we could take. We took a look at around $2 billion of cost actions that we could take in 2020. And good news is we hit all of those targets. We were able to take out $2 billion of cash. About half of that, unfortunately, had to come from the people side of the business. That was furloughs, that was layoffs, that was pay cuts, all those really hard things to do. We also reduced our discretionary spend, our engineering and development spend. And at the end of the year, I think the most important thing is the cash. We thought we were going to get about a $4 billion tailwind. We got about $4.7 billion. And so we were able to end the year with around $9 billion of cash on the balance sheet, very, very strong liquidity position, and really positioned us, the business, for the recovery that we think will happen later this year in commercial aero. Tough year last year. I think decremental margins, as you can imagine, when you're losing commercial aftermarket, which is where most of your money is made, and we saw decremental margins of north of 50%. We believe as the aftermarket comes back, we're going to see incremental margins of north of 80% because of all the costs we've taken out. So a lot of hard work, a lot of very tough decisions that the team had to make, but proud of the way they came through it. And I think, today the business is uniquely positioned for a recovery, which will happen. I can't tell you what day, but it will happen.
Well, let's talk about the recovery for a second. I mean, for our audience, to make sure everyone understands, Pratt & Whitney is part of your company, and that is commercial aerospace, a lot of jet engines being made. And as you say, you make a lot of the money, actually, on the aftermarket. That is, as I understand it, the maintenance and the parts afterwards. When you're not flying on airplanes, you don't need all that stuff. Are you prepared for a real snapback? What if it comes back faster than you think, given the cost cuts you've made? Could you be caught out a little bit and not having the capacity to address that?
So I think, even as we think about a recovery this year, and maybe just to put it in perspective, so for the year, we think our commercial traffic, domestic traffic, is probably going to be up about 36%, but that's still down about 35% from 2019 loads. So as an example, one of the engines that Pratt & Whitney makes is called the V2500. It powers A320 Airbus aircraft. We typically see about 1,000 of those engines come in every year for a shop visit for repair. Last year, that was about 500. This year, again, we'll see a recovery in that, but nowhere near back to the 1,000. So we've retained the capacity for the recovery, but we have taken out all of the, I would say, the folks that we need to keep the operation lean. But I don't have any concern about a resurgence. I think everybody has tried to be cautious about how much they take out and not to cut into the bone, because people want to travel. They will travel again. It will take some time, but we are confident we're going to see a recovery this year, not back to where it was in 19. It'll take several years, but confident in our approach in terms of the cost takeout.
What are you anticipating and therefore planning for with respect to military spending?
So interestingly, we ended the year with roughly $67 billion in backlog. And as we think about how that will play out in 21 and 22, probably going to see organic growth of around 3 to 5%. And I say that very carefully because as part of the merger last year, we had to divest a couple of our military businesses. So the actual reported number looks a little funky, but I think about 3 to 5% organically this year and next on what is essentially a flat defense budget. And I think that's probably about as good as you can do it in this marketplace. And again, there's certain areas where Raytheon Technologies has a real advantage, obviously sensing or radars, which is the heritage of Raytheon, but also in the space sensing business and space communications business and ground traffic control. So a lot of pieces of the puzzle within Raytheon Technologies, but I think, we're pretty well aligned with what the emerging technologies are needed for the Department of Defense.
What do you anticipate the long-term changes in Raytheon's business will be from the pandemic? And I'll give you a possible example, which is how much commercial office space you need. I saw a report that maybe you're going to be having less now because you've discovered people can work from home. Do you see longer-term changes in the way you do business?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, David. And as when we first started this last, I guess, end of March, when people started working from home, I was anxious to have everybody get back to the office as soon as possible. But having been able to successfully run the company for the last 9-10 months now remotely and see the advantages of having a remote workforce, I think it gives us incredible flexibility in terms of hiring the right people without having to pull up stakes and move folks around. So as we think about it, we've got 32 million square feet of office space. What I've challenged the team is to find a way to reduce 25% of that. Now, you're never going to get rid of all of it, obviously, but as I think about it, we'll probably have three different types of folks. There'll be those that come to the office every day, come to the factory floor every day, and that'll perhaps be a third of the workforce. There'll be a third of the workforce that will permanently be working remotely, and another third that will probably be, I would call a hybrid. That is, they'll come into the office 1 or 2 days a week for team meetings and training, and the rest of the time work remotely. And we're going to be reconfiguring office space. We're going to start with our Pratt & Whitney business this year to model how that's going to work. We call it the Office of the Future project. But I think, again, if you can take out 8 million square feet of office space, there's a tremendous amount of savings, not counting the savings that you have in terms of the efficiency of folks working remotely as opposed to commuting in every single day to the office.
So one more question. You've just gotten your company put together as of April 3rd, and maybe it's a little too early for you, but where are you going to grow, whether organically or inorganically, through acquisition or internally? Where's your growth opportunity?
Well, unfortunately, 2020 was not a growth year. In fact, we lost about $13 billion of revenue, if you can imagine, on the commercial side of the business with the downturn. So we see obviously big growth coming on this year and next as the recovery occurs in commercial air. We're probably going to see, after we get past the first quarter, when we get to some easier comparisons, we'll probably see 10% growth organically in the back half of the year, and that'll continue into next year. But as we think about where we're investing, we're really looking at opportunities to take and leverage the technology from the legacy Raytheon business and the legacy UTC businesses to provide some unique solutions. And I'll give you just one example. The air traffic control system in this country needs to be upgraded. Today we provide the radars, we provide the ground processing through our Rockwell Collins business. We provide the comm systems from the airplanes down to the ground control stations. We think we can provide a unique solution to the FAA to streamline that whole gamut of technologies and really provide a super vehicle for us to grow our business in the next several years. So there's many things like that, whether it's hypersonics with some high temperature materials, whether it's assured communications on the battlefield, or whether it's connectivity with the ground from air traffic control. There's a lot of things we can do, but I think we're uniquely positioned to be growing in what is probably going to be a pretty flat defense market for the next couple of years. Yeah, but you talk about infrastructure. Everybody talks about air traffic control. No question about it. Thank you so much. Really a pleasure to have you with us. That's Greg Hayes. He's Raytheon Technologies CEO. Coming up here, the fallout for corporate political donations after the violence on Capitol Hill. We get a report from Doug Pinkham. He's president of the Public Affairs Council. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. We have some news now from the Bloomberg, as was predicted. Now, Tony Blinken has just been confirmed by the United States Senate as the next Secretary of State serving under President Biden. In the meantime, let's talk about political contributions from corporations. The attack on the Capitol only 2 weeks before the inauguration triggered a series of companies reviewing their approach to campaign contributions, particularly to those in the Congress who sought to stop the certification of the Electoral College vote. But also, more generally, they're thinking about their contributions. For a read on what he's hearing from companies, we welcome now Doug Pinkham. He is president of the Public Affairs Council, and that's an association for policy professionals. So, Doug, thank you so much for being here. What are you hearing from companies?
Well, we're getting, frankly, inundated from companies. There was a total of 280 companies who had contributed money from their PACs to the 147 Republicans who had voted not to accept the election results, right? And the vote, finally took place the same day as the attempted insurrection on the Capitol. So it caused quite a bit of controversy, not just among Democrats or the general public, but honestly among a lot of companies. And it wasn't just being worried about reputations. It's, CEOs were ticked off because, they support a free and open election and democracy. So it became this huge deal, and then activists and media were calling around saying, are you in favor of suspending contributions to these 147? Well, at last count, CNN has a tally that comes from the group called the Center for Responsive Politics. And what they show is roughly half of those companies, about 140 or so, have either said we're not going to make contributions to those who had voted against accepting election results, or they have paused all contributions to just sort of, figure out what the right strategy is. And we, among other things, we provide, services to companies and nonprofits who are trying to deal with the outside world, all those outside things other than marketing, corporate responsibility, public policy. And it's really a tough situation because it's not just one or two crazy members of Congress doing something controversial. It's 147, including leaders like Kevin McCarthy in the House. However, it's been interesting to see how quickly so many really big companies said, we are not going to be giving any PAC money to those people involved. We're suspending those donations, and it may last through the next election. It might last 4 years. They're in the process of deciding that. Companies are also in the process of deciding whether they need tougher criteria in deciding who to give money to. Though it's not required by law, most companies have a PAC board of directors, and they have criteria. Well, more and more in recent years, companies, because they are concerned about reputation, put into their criteria, for shorthand, it's we don't give money to crazy people. But what they're really saying is an individual who is not consistent with our company's values doesn't deserve our support, even if they support us on our public policy issues. I think that's one of those.
Doug, just to interrupt you, that's where the rubber hits the road, isn't it? Even when they're not consistent with our public policy issues. Let's be honest. A lot of companies give money, and they're asked to give money by people who have jurisdiction over their businesses. I mean, this is money in politics, and it's going to be hard to get that out.
In fact, it's interesting is that often the blame for money in politics goes to the companies because they contribute it. But one reason companies like PACs is they're so heavily regulated and they're transparent that it's like really easy to track any contribution over $200. But the dirty little secret of Washington is companies get leaned on for contributions. Back when soft money was banned, if you remember back in the early 2000s with McCain-Feingold Act, and they banned these huge contributions to political parties, there was a very quiet but audible applause from Washington lobbyists who said, thank God I don't have to say no to some high-ranking Democrat or Republican. So that's one of the real challenges. But here's the interesting twist now is I think some of the big businesses realize they are being taken for granted. And let's be honest, the Trump administration was pro-business in some areas, but anti-business in some areas, like trade, and in terms of having some level of stability in global business and markets. And if the Democrats are smart, they can say, we're in favor of, we're not anti-regulation, we're anti-bad regulation, and we are willing to allow business to have a seat at the table. I'm not sure the Republican Party has realized that threat. Hopefully the moderates in the Republican Party can bring back the ones on the fringe to a level where people in the business community can look at them as being more pro-business.
It's a fascinating story. A lot of soul searching going on. Thank you so much, Doug. Great to have you with us. That's Doug Pinkham. He is president of the Public Affairs Council. And right now, what is happening is the White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki is briefing the press with the domestic policy advisor, Susan Rice. You remember she was the former national security advisor under President Obama. And you can watch that news briefing live by using the function Live on your Bloomberg terminal. Coming up here, we'll be speaking with Mike Sommers. He's American Petroleum Institute's CEO. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and radio. I'm David Weston. One of the first executive orders President Biden signed was one stopping the Keystone XL pipeline, a controversial project that has been on and off for years. For a view from the industry, welcome now Mike Sommers. He's CEO of the American Petroleum Institute. Always love talking with you, Mike. So give us your perspective. I suspect you're not very supportive of the president's decision.
No, we really view this as a significant step backwards, both for environmental progress and for economic recovery. As I think your viewers know, David, pipelines are the safest, most responsible way that we can transport the oil and gas that America needs. And the Keystone XL pipeline was going to be a way to connect Canadian producers to the products that Americans need on a daily basis. So we were very, very disappointed with that decision.
Is it dead?
Well, I mean, this is a project that's been 10 years in the making, and based on the jobs that were cut as a consequence of this decision, I think it's very concerning from our perspective that this project is probably not going to go forward at this time. And I'd remind you that this is about 10,000 union jobs, good-paying jobs that would have occurred as a consequence of the Keystone XL pipeline. And just on the day after they made this announcement, 2,000 jobs were cut. So we were very disappointed in this decision.
So that's obviously very hard news for the people involved directly. What about more broadly for our energy policy? What is the practical effect of not having Keystone XL?
Well, the truth of the matter is that these products are coming to the United States from Canada one way or another. They're going to come on rail primarily. We would have preferred, of course, for them to come via pipeline, which is the safest and, of course, most environmentally responsible way to do it. The Keystone XL pipeline, TC Energy, the parent company of Keystone, they'd actually promised to fully power the pipeline itself by renewables by 2030. This was a win-win-win. It had passed every environmental test that it had to pass. The Canadian government was fully supportive of this project as well. So I think it's a real loss for the American people. We're still going to use oil and gas. The question is whether or not where we're going to get it from. And unfortunately, this is a policy that is going to force us to import products from elsewhere. We'll continue to get these products from Canada, but we'll become more dependent on regimes that are hostile to American needs because of this decision.
So, Mike, I'm going to ask you to do something really hard, which is put the jersey on for the other team now. What drove the Biden administration to do this? What's their argument that says this is why we should not have this pipeline?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, David, I think it was politics. This pipeline has become the symbol for many in the activist community to shut down development of fossil fuels in Canada and the United States. Unfortunately, the world's going to continue to demand these products, and there's no shutting down that demand, at least in the short term. And I think our view is that we should be getting it from our number one trading partner. In the country of Canada. And we'll continue to advocate for this kind of energy infrastructure that's going to ensure that Americans have supply of safe and reliable and affordable energy.
How badly does this hurt Canada?
Well, you'd have to check in with President Trudeau. As you know, he was a huge supporter of this pipeline's development. And that it is a country that is very dependent on revenue from fossil fuel development. So we're concerned about our number one trading partner and what this does for the bilateral relationship.
Where's the next skirmish likely to be?
Well, we know that activists on the other side of this industry have targeted fossil fuel infrastructure as a way to stop production in the United States. They figured out that the United States is the number one place where we're producing oil and natural gas now, and the world's going to continue to demand these products. So what the activist community has done is they've focused on this infrastructure in the middle. So we understand that every one of these pipelines is going to have to be advocated for, and we'll continue to push for that infrastructure to be developed because we want to provide affordable and reliable fuel to the American people.
Are there other big pipelines that are waiting for permission?
Well, just about every pipeline's a fight right now, as you know. So we're working with all of our member companies on that development, and we'll want to work with the Biden administration on that as well. Environmental issues are a keystone for our industry as well, and we want to make sure these products are delivered in a way that is safe for the environment, and we know that pipelines are the best way to transport these products to the American people.
Okay. It's always great to have you with us, Mike. That's Mike Sommers. He's the American Petroleum Institute's CEO. I'm delighted to say he's going to be staying with us for our second hour of Balance of Power on the radio. We're going to talk more broadly about how, if you're in the fossil fuel business, you come to deal with the Biden administration, which is deeply committed to climate change. He's got a lot of issues beyond the Keystone Pipeline. In the meantime, we'll also talk to the man who wrote the book on vaccines. He's Professor Michael Kinch of Washington University. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.